The Silk Road was built more than 2,000 years ago, and it is still considered one of the most valuable trade networks ever. Caravans traveled the road and carried wealth, ideas, and influence, and the cities along these paths became empires. But today there's a new Silk Road: private jet paths. These paths are more exclusive, efficient, and powerful. And this is the story of how private jet routes became the modern Silk Road and how following them will show us where tomorrow's empires are being built. Welcome to Alux, the place where future billionaires come to get inspired. So today, oil is still the most valuable commodity on the planet. Data and energy are catching up, but they're not quite there yet. 2,000 years ago, though, the most valuable commodity on the planet was silk. It was worth more than its weight in gold, and there were two reasons for this. One, the material was smooth, light, strong, and beautiful. And two, nobody outside of China knew how to make it, revealing that secret was actually punishable by death. The entire world wanted to get their hands on silk, and only one country knew how to make it. Which brings us to part one of this story, okay? How the Silk Road began. So we start at the site of the Yellow River Valley in northern China, where archaeologists believe silk was first made. Thousands of years ago, the world discovered that the cocoons of silkworms could produce a thread unlike anything else in nature. Now, Chinese farmers were the first to learn how to domesticate silkworms and cultivate the material, and they guarded that process with their lives, okay? Which meant that the rest of the world could only buy silk from China alone. Everyone wanted it, and they were willing to pay whatever it took. But the path from China to Europe, Africa, and the rest of Asia was inhibited by violent, nomadic tribes, treacherous mountain terrains, and dangerous rivers. Chinese dynasties knew that if they could just clear the path, the entire country and its wealthy families would get richer. So Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty was the first to really spearhead this mission in 130 BCE. The Silk Road wasn't a single path that stretched from one part of China to another. No, it was a vast network of roads, towns, and shipping ports that spanned thousands of miles and connected China to the rest of Asia, Iran, the Persian Gulf, and the Mediterranean, all the way to Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, Turkey, and eventually to Rome. Now, traveling the full length from China to Rome took about 2 years, so merchants rarely traveled the entire way. Instead, goods were handed off in stages and passed on. Throughout these paths, there needed to be ports, inns, entirely new cities, trade hubs, security, and wells and reservoirs. And all of that had to be built. The Silk Road was more about the infrastructure than it was a dirt road, just like today's billionaire flight paths, where the route is secondary to the places they're stopping at. But before we dive into that part any further, we want to take you on the ancient Silk Road journey, where traders started by moving silk and then spices, porcelain, paper, glass, and gems. The wealth from this trade made everyone rich. Merchants became so wealthy they were basically royalty. Empires collected taxes from caravans. Cities along these routes became powerful. This was the first thing the Silk Road carried: wealth. In her book, Before European Hegemony, historian Janet Abu-Lughod describes the ancient Silk Road as the world's first truly global economy. It was the first system to move wealth across continents in any kind of structured way. And the more wealth moves, the more powerful it becomes. The dirt tracks themselves never made anyone rich. Wealth was created by whatever was valuable, the movement of this value. The scarcity of it, the infrastructure needed to support its movement, the financial instruments created because of it, and the power that came from it. So let us explain, okay? On the old Silk Road, wealth took the form of luxury goods. That was what was valuable. Now, if it stayed where it was created, it would lose its value. Silk locked away in a palace or treasury was nothing more than fabric. But once it was on the move, luxury goods like silk, spices, jade, and porcelain carried enormous value in small, portable bundles. You could load it onto a camel and have it equal to gold by the time it crossed a desert. the value increased again because the journey was so dangerous. And you could say that the greatest multiplier of wealth wasn't even the product itself, it was the infrastructure needed to transport it. What created wealth were the places that caravans stopped. Samarkand grew powerful because it sat in Central Asia, where every east-west caravan had to pass through. Merchants built warehouses and markets there. Armies were stationed to protect it, and rulers taxed every camel that came through. Baghdad thrived because it controlled the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates and turned Silk Road trade into banking, credit, and scholarship. Constantinople became one of the richest cities on Earth because it controlled the narrow strait where Asia and Europe meet. All goods headed west, bottlenecked there, and the empire charged a toll at the gate. Each of these cities became wealthy and powerful because they controlled the choke points of trade and could extract value every time wealth passed through. Along the path, people created financial instruments like credit, loans, and collateral. Goods stop being just physical objects and turn into financial instruments. Merchants could deposit silk or spices with a banker and receive a written note of credit, which was easier to carry than bulky goods. This credit could then be lent out, which created loans that financed other caravans or even military campaigns. The final stage is power, okay? By the time the goods reached distant markets, they had transformed into treasure that empires used to fund armies, build cities, and expand their power. Now, despite all of this, some would argue that wealth was the least influential thing that the Silk Road carried, and we'll unpack why in just a bit. The Silk Road hustled and bustled for thousands of years, but around the 1400s, the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople and put such a high tax on land trade, it bankrupted merchants and buyers. Also around this time, Portuguese explorers opened up new sea routes to India and Asia. Ships were faster, cheaper, and safer than long caravan journeys. So the Silk Road that once connected east and west faded into history. But while the old roads fell silent, and with it most of the riches and goods disappeared, it did create the world that we live in today. Which brings us to part 2 of this story, the new Silk Road. But before we dive into this one, we have to tell you something, okay? This kind of knowledge and pattern spotting can really help you predict the future of where wealth will flow. But if you're not paying attention, it'll fly right past you. And yet paying attention and noticing these things while trying to balance the rest of your life, it's a lot of work. That's why we do some of the work for you, okay? We've built an app for people just like you, and in there we've got courses and collections on learning, building a business, figuring out your brand, and even figuring out yourself and your relationships. This kind of constant learning that is actually fun doesn't feel like you're slugging through an Udemy course. No offense to Udemy or the likes. This is what will give you an edge, okay? It's what sets you apart from everyone else. And if you want the app today, we've put together a special discount. Download it in your app store, come back and scan this QR code on screen, and you'll get 25% off your annual membership. I'll be right there with you on the inside, but in the meantime, let's get back to today's story, shall we? All right, so just like the old Silk Road wasn't valuable because of the actual path, the new Silk Road doesn't hold the wealth up in the sky. No, it's on the ground where the planes land. In 2023 alone, private jets flew over 4.2 million flights. So we've swapped the road and its arrows for the sky and its flight paths. Caravans and camels became private jets. Ports and trading stations are now private airports. Markets and inns became boardrooms, exclusive member clubs, and high-end restaurants. And the luxury goods? Well, that became the person with money and power, which highlights the first of the 2 biggest differences between the old and new Silk Road. We tend to default to thinking that commodities and resources hold the value that eventually multiplies. But that changed a long time ago, okay? All the way back in the 1600s when the first stock market was created in Denmark. Suddenly, the shareholder who could extract value from every shipload without ever touching the cargo mattered more than the salt and pepper products. Over the next 400 years, we had oil barons like Rockefeller and Carnegie control entire industries. Oil still mattered, but owning the company that owned the oil mattered more. Then, finance eclipsed production, and people who controlled capital flows, like bankers, fund managers, and billionaires, they gained more leverage than the goods themselves. Now, the true luxury goods are the billionaires themselves. When they step off their private planes, the deals they sign create more value than the actual commodity. And since production of, well, anything is easy now, like you can go to the mall and buy hundreds of spices and cover them with dozens of silk gowns if you want to, it's just not so rare anymore, which means that the decision maker has become more scarce than the commodity. They are the precious cargo now, which means that the cities they visit often become rich and powerful. So let's take a look at the places, shall we? Teterboro Airport, which is about 12 miles from Manhattan, is the busiest private jet airport in the world. It serves Wall Street, corporate America, and the high-end fashion world. In 2008, during the global financial crisis, Teterboro was the runway of last resort as jets ferried bankers and CEOs to emergency meetings. New York is like the modern-day Constantinople. Constantinople once controlled the terms of East-West trade, and New York is the capital of global finance. Its financial role pulls the rich in, and the rich pour more wealth into that city. People might complain about the expensive rent, but everyone still wants to live there, right? And we can draw the same parallels when we look at the other places that draw in private flights. Baghdad once used its geography to dominate East-West trade, and now we have Dubai as the halfway point between Europe and Asia. Their location, plus how they built themselves into a free zone by scrapping taxes on foreign investors, has turned the path to Dubai into one of the most popular in the world for the rich. Even countries that don't have hundreds of private flights coming in every day benefit when a billionaire touches down. Like in 2023, when Amcor Technologies executives flew into Hanoi, Vietnam, opened up a $1.6 billion semiconductor factory, and created thousands of jobs. Or in 2016, when Masayoshi Son, the founder of SoftBank, boarded his Gulfstream and flew from Tokyo to Riyadh for a 45-minute meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. At the end of that meeting, he walked away with a $45 billion investment commitment from Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. That capital allowed SoftBank to launch the largest tech investment fund in history, which poured tens of billions of dollars into companies like Uber, DoorDash, and Slack. Multiple cities made money from that, including London, San Francisco Bay Area, Hong Kong, and Riyadh. In the past, Samarkand attracted traders from every region, and now they flock to Singapore to park their money. Wherever the route stops, the wealth will grow. At the start of this video, we said that the spread of wealth was just the beginning of what the ancient Silk Road gave us. The money and wealth disappeared shortly after the Silk Road went silent. But the spread of technology, culture, politics, and ideas, that compounded. And now we're moving into part 3 of our story, looking beyond the wealth. So, the history of the Silk Road, the books we read and paper that we write on today only exist because the secrets of papermaking moved west from China on the road so people could preserve and spread knowledge in medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. That is how Indian scholars shared advanced mathematics, like the concept of zero and early forms of algebra. Traders and diplomats carried these ideas west, and over time they became the foundation of modern accounting, engineering, and finance. The compass spread from China into the Islamic world and then into Europe, so sailors didn't have to rely only on stars or coastlines anymore, which meant ships could travel further into open seas. Gunpowder traveled west from China, so armies that used to rely on swords and arrows now used cannons and firearms, and kingdoms could expand faster. Even political ideas spread. The Han Dynasty made alliances with kingdoms like the Daiwan and the Kushan Empire, which spread Chinese systems of tribute, taxes, and record-keeping. The Mongols gave merchants passports called paitsi that guaranteed safe travel across their empire, which made trade routes stable and strengthened their rule. States that worked together could govern bigger and more diverse groups, while those who refused to adapt lost their wealth and territory. And these days, a lot of the global politics starts in Davos, in an old Swiss ski resort. It's hosted by the World Economic Forum and has been since the 1970s, where the heads of states, billionaires, and CEOs meet each other in January to exchange ideas and strike deals. In January 2020, Zurich Airport recorded more than 1,300 private jet landings in a single week for this forum. That's where Donald Trump used the stage to defend his economic record. Greta Thunberg told leaders they were failing on climate change, and executives from Microsoft, BlackRock, and Goldman Sachs announced new green investment strategies. Now, the culture spreads a little differently on the new Silk Road, but the foundation is pretty much the same. In 2022, the head of Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, Yasser Al Rumayyan, flew by private jet into London to acquire the football team Newcastle United. Oil revenue from the Gulf turned the team into a Premier League club that influences sports and politics. In 2017, Jeff Bezos flew into Sun Valley, Idaho on his Gulfstream G650 for private investment firm Allen & Company's annual conference. There, he met with Shari Redstone, who controlled Paramount Pictures, and Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, and rumor has it this is where they first discussed Amazon buying MGM, which they acquired a few years later for $8.45 billion. And then in 2019, they closed a deal for Les Miserables after private negotiations in a Cannes hotel, and Hollywood began to see them as more than a tech company dabbling in streaming. In fact, every May, the skies over Nice and Cannes fill with private jets heading to the Cannes Film Festival. Executives from Netflix, Amazon, Sony, Disney, and Universal fly in on their Gulfstreams and try to outbid each other for the next big thing. And then they bring it to the rest of the world, and then those movies go on to shape our language, opinions, and music. And in the next few days, as the weekend comes around, hundreds of jets will leave New York on Friday and land on Palm Beach or in the Caribbean or ski resort in the Alps, and they'll keep entire economies alive that build themselves around that cash flow. This Silk Road is far more exclusive, which brings us to the second of the biggest differences between the old and new Silk Road. Earlier on in this video, we said the cargo shift from carrying luxury goods to carrying rich people was the first big difference. In the world of Roman emperors, Greek philosophers, and Persian kings, the wealth carried by spices, silver, and other commodities had to move through many hands before it reached its final destination. At each stop, middlemen earned a profit, local rulers collected taxes, and markets made money. But today, that physical cargo isn't necessary, so the power rests with the decision maker who controls the transaction rather than the traders who move it. Everything about the road looks different. But where we are today is a direct legacy of the beginning of the ancient Silk Road. So where will we go with it next? Stay tuned to find out. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up and share it. Comment what you think will be the next Silk Road. And if you want some more of this, we've got a library of over 2,000 videos for you to dive into next. I'll be right there with you, my friend. Until next time, take care.